We are Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we're proud to call West Philadelphia our home. Today in our neighborhood, almost 40% of families are living in poverty. More than 10,000 children, that's 1 in 4, are living with asthma. And a person's chances of being the victim of crime are almost twice the national average. Did you know that 80% of a child's health is determined by non-medical factors, like housing, hunger, trauma, and poverty? Because we are devoted to children's health, we cannot ignore what's happening in our neighborhood. This is why we created Healthier Together. It is a set of programs outside the walls of our hospital, focused on factors that impact the health of children in West Philadelphia. We used research and conversations with community leaders to identify areas of greatest need. CHOP is committed to addressing those needs, plus emerging issues and those amplified by COVID-19. CHOP is forming public-private partnerships to repair houses where children with asthma live. Renovations remove mold and other asthma triggers, so kids like Shai can get their asthma under control. % of our West Philadelphia patient families don't have enough healthy food to eat. CHOP supports several programs to ensure that children don't go hungry and that families know how to prepare healthy meals. Living in a high-crime area leads to high stress and trauma. CHOP identifies kids who have been exposed to violence and connects them to services that help them build resilience. The goal? Reduce the harm trauma inflicts on kids. To promote the economic health of West Philadelphia families and businesses, CHOP is committed to buying goods and services from local businesses. For individual families, we sponsor free financial counseling and free tax preparation right in the neighborhood. CHOP is in West Philadelphia, working with our government, community, and philanthropic partners, standing alongside families and children, standing up to support our neighbors. We need partners to stand with us. Join us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Grohlman with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I'm thrilled to be here today to present a fantastic panel that is going to focus our discussion on how do we serve the most vulnerable people in our community. And right now, certainly our community has been very challenged. But one of the things that really energizes me about Philadelphia is that when we have a problem to solve, people really do come together. They bring their expertise, they bring their energy and their enthusiasm and their empathy to serve those who need us the most. The pandemic has no doubt infected, hospitalized, and taken thousands of lives in our city, in our state, and really throughout our country. The economic impact is devastating. These are things that you all know. And then the trauma of racism. Police killings of Black men and women and gun violence continues to take a very heavy toll on all of us. And as you think of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and what our mission is all about, it's that we are very focused on the health and wellness futures of America's children, and really children throughout the world. We've long understood that a child's health is greatly influenced by so much more than just the delivery of excellent medical care. It goes beyond what happens within the walls of our 60 locations throughout South Jersey. throughout Pennsylvania, and even our global health centers in Botswana and the Dominican Republic. It goes to what's happening in an individual's home. It's what's happening in their community. It's how the economy influences their future and the hope and the potential and the promise that every child should have, no matter where they live. And to better accomplish this, it's important that we, CHOP, partner with so many Philadelphia nonprofits, local businesses, government officials, schools, to advance pioneering initiatives. This is work that we cannot do alone. We need to do it together in partnership. And if we do that, we truly feel that we will be successful in the work ahead of us. It's now my pleasure to invite our moderator to take over, a very valued and esteemed colleague of mine, Amanda Evans, who's our program manager for Healthier Together, and somebody who is also committed to her community. Amanda, with that, I invite you to take it over. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks so much, Peter. Thanks so much, Peter. And I'm really excited to join everyone this afternoon as a moderator for Disrupting the Determinants. So I think the video that was actually played in the beginning tells such an important and alarming story that a lot of our communities are facing in Philadelphia. As it's mentioned, about 25% of Philadelphians and more than a third of Philadelphian children live below the poverty line. And there are severe pockets of poverty right in CHOP's own backyard in West and Southwest Philly. And as the video outlined, a lot of our children and families in CHOP surrounding communities are experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity, are exposed to violence, as well as attend subpar schools. So these stressors really are associated with poor and physical health outcomes. So as Peter mentioned, the healthcare industry really is moving towards a new wave of following what a lot of our public health experts like myself have been saying for a while of we have to step outside the walls of the hospital, outside of the acute clinical care, and really address the whole individual and the social factors that are influencing individual health. So as Peter mentioned, I am the program manager of Healthier Together at CHOP. And Healthier Together is an initiative that was launched in July 2019 to address the social needs, such as the behaviors, socioeconomic, and environmental factors that impact an individual's health. So our 4 focus areas are housing, hunger, trauma, and poverty. And this panel, Disrupting the Determinants, really will dive deep into Healthier Together's focus areas and highlighting our different partnerships in each of them. So one of our guiding principles is collaboration. So really emphasizing the together in Healthier Together. So we know we can't do this work alone. It really, no one organization can. And it really takes a village to address these complex problems. So to disrupt the determinants, collaboration really is key. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. So we have Megha Kulshreshtha, who is the founder of Food Connect. We have Osarugue, Osa-Edoh, who's the staff attorney at Community Legal Services, and Crystal Wortham, who's a family service coordinator at Uplift Center for Grieving Children. So welcome, ladies. I'm really excited to dive in this panel here today. So let's start with really telling us about your different organizations. How are you all addressing the social determinants of health through Healthier Together's initiative? So Megha, I'll start with you and Food Connect.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, this year has been we've experienced a lot of different shifts happening on food access level. So a lot of what Food Connect does, we're a nonprofit organization that works with local food banks, shelters, meal sites to help them with their distribution needs. And we also work with food vendors across the city, across the region. When they have extra food, how do we safely transport that food in real time? A lot of our solutions, our model revolves around collaboration. It's at the cornerstone of what we do. We are not looking to rebuild a thriving system. We're looking to complement it. So a lot of the solutions we've found are able to take off because we actively work with the existing partners in the communities, existing meal service sites, and understand their needs first. We listen first, and then we offer what solutions are available. So for us, increasing food access during a time when meal sites could be a place where there is extra risk that's posed to your health. So for us, we had to shift very quickly to offer additional distribution support as businesses are closing down, and as there are spikes and dips in the food supply itself. COVID-19 has created a lot of upstream effects on the food supply, where sometimes prices are skyrocketing and food becomes unaffordable. Sometimes there's dips in food supply where you can't access healthy food. So there's been a lot that we are confronting on that side, and having an immediate response when food does become available is super critical. So for us, kind of releasing all hands on deck approach with all of our partners. We have several hundred drivers in the city to make sure that we're able to be extremely responsive with food. And then on the food access side, we are working with meal sites and shelters and food pantries across the city to implement home delivery solutions. We are literally meeting people where they are during the pandemic to be able to increase food access. There has always been a need for these types of services, but now with the pandemic, it's become even more crucial. So lots of aspects to think about and discuss, and but that's kind of a quick overview.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we'll definitely dive into that a little bit deeper too. And it really, you mentioned meeting people where they are. So it sounds like your organization really is pushing new boundaries. So speaking about pushing new boundaries, Osarugue, I know we recently announced an extension of the CHOP and CLS partnership. So can you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here, Amanda. As you said, my name is Osarugue Osa-Edoh. I am an attorney with Community Legal Services, and Community Legal Services is a nonprofit organization that offers free legal services to low-income Philadelphians. And so we launched a couple years ago, we launched a medical legal partnership with CHOP. And specifically housed in the CareBots Pediatric Center in West Philadelphia. And the medical legal partnership model, just to give you a brief overview, is really trying to tackle the social determinants of health and being mindful of social determinants of health by giving holistic care to families. And the way that we kind of think about this care is there are so many factors outside of just the patient visit that affect whether or not you're going to see positive or negative health outcomes for individuals. Factors that you've already mentioned, Amanda, like housing, food insecurity, poverty, trauma. And a lot of the times these issues, they are medical, but they're influenced by factors that, I could help with as an attorney, or that a social worker can help with, or that a community health advocate or health educator can help with. And so the model is really about bringing everybody together under one roof, so that if a family has an issue that is a medical issue, that there is a legal component, a more for example, a child who's having asthma flare-ups and a family who is renting, and we know that there are issues in the home that make the asthma worse, but the landlord is not being responsive, that's something that I could step in and help with. So it's really just our model pre-pandemic was having myself, medical provider, social worker all in one place, so the family didn't have to leave CareBots to go to different institutions to get the care that they needed, when we know that when we're working together to really address these issues, then we can provide that holistic care that we would like to. We can speak more about just all the changes that the pandemic brings to that approach. I think the biggest is just, that everybody being in one place model can no longer happen. So thinking about ways that I can stay and that we can stay in contact with the other members of our team, the medical providers, the social workers, the community health advocates, and while also staying in touch with families and getting necessary information out to families has really been the challenge for us. And we've been able to stay connected through a lot of different ways, including video conferencing and video chatting, like I'm sure the rest of you have as well, trying to keep information in a central location that any family could access. One of the things that we've seen in the pandemic is that people communicate differently. Some people have the capacity to engage in video chatting. Some people don't. They prefer text messages. They prefer email. So really just kind of keeping track of what works best for each patient family so that we can stay in constant communication both with each other and with them. So that's just sort of a brief overview, but there's like Megha said, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for that. And it made me think of kind of the co-location model. So I know pre-pandemic, your team is really embedded in at CareBots with the team. And it makes me think of really housing as a form of healthcare. And I think that co-location model really is a great model to go after. So Crystal, I actually want to hand it over to you and Uplift, because I know you all are embedded in our CareBot Center as well. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization?
Absolutely, Amanda. Thank you. Again, I'm Crystal Wortham, the Family Services Coordinator at Uplift Center for Grieving Children. And I'm just really excited about being included in this panel discussion. So at Uplift, we offer a number of grief services, from professional development workshops to post-crisis groups, the community groups. We also do in-school grief groups, as well as our family services groups, which we do at the CareBots location. And our family services groups, the families come after school hours, and it's children from kindergarten through the 12th grade. And we also have groups for their caregivers. So we do cater to the family. And one thing that we did pre-COVID was that we actually were able to sit down and enjoy a healthy meal together, just to create that family, create that community. And the families would sit down at the table with the Uplift clinicians, along with our volunteers who help us out in group and our interns. And that's how we began all of our groups. And we talked about grief, and we know that talking about grief and death is never easy, but imagine trying to do that and be present when you're trying to suppress hunger pains and, when you don't even know where your next meal is coming from, and trying to silence the growls of your stomach while you're in a group. We cannot expect the caregivers, and we realized we couldn't expect them to begin to process their grief so that they can then support their children if they don't know if they'll be able to even feed those children when they got home later that evening. So providing that meal and not singling those out who were in need, but just offering the meal to everyone. And should a family disclose that they did have some type of food shortage, then, or some type of hardship or another struggle, then we would connect them to the resources in their community, because it's unfair to ask someone to tackle some type of psychological or physiological when their basic needs have not been met. And as many of you are aware, that Philadelphia has been experiencing alarming rates of trauma, violence, and grief, yet the caregivers are still expected to report to their jobs, whether in person or virtual, and be the best employee that they can be. And our children, who know more than what we give them credit for, they're expected to excel in their academics under these circumstances. We know that gun violence and homicides are increasing, and the expectations to function as usual while living through this pandemic is still on each and every one of us. So our peer-to-peer model of support allows participants to process and create their own narrative while seeing themselves in each other. And it helps to empower those families as they live and they function within the community, because they're not only able to share their story in the but they hear other people's stories as well. So they are receiving and giving support, and that's building community.
Yeah, thanks for that, Crystal. And I think a lot of what you mentioned is that daily trauma that individuals are experiencing day in and day out, in terms of all of the social needs they're experiencing. And you touched on this a little bit in terms of creativity of how Uplift is really being creative in how they're addressing those needs and really taking care of the individual. So we know that addressing community needs really requires a lot of creativity and out-of-box thinking. We're living through multiple public health crises right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Racism is a public health issue. The list really goes on. And I think all of these have simultaneously exacerbated the needs in our communities. So our new normal also makes it difficult and challenging to address those social needs. Osarugue, I know you mentioned before, like, we're not in person anymore. So a lot of our places where we did meet and collaborate are closed. We are gathering in this virtual environment. So I think that requires a lot of innovation. So really, how has your organization during this time, especially during the pandemic, really impacted and serving the clients in different ways? So Osarugue, if you want to touch on that, how have you guys innovated during this time?
Sure. And I think like you said, and like we've all been saying, I think the biggest kind of change to how we do the work is that a lot of what's in person can no longer happen. And I really like what Crystal was saying about how that personal touch, like sitting down with a family and having a meal, can make such a difference, because I think especially for families in crisis, feeling that human connection is so important. And especially now when everybody is in this heightened state of, grief and just pain because of everything that's going on, I think it's really important to find ways to keep that connection, even if it's virtual. And so for us, the biggest change that we've made is kind of taking the information that lives within the organization, either through a flyer that you might pick up at an appointment, or through a one-on-one conversation that you might have with myself or another provider who's at CareBots, and kind of making that globally available. So one of the things that we've done is all of the information that kind of lives in one place has now been transported to a website that anybody can access. And the website, it's called phillytenant.org. It's for tenants to go online and look at resources and legal information for a whole range of different issues relating to housing. Obviously, the first line of information has to do with just COVID, and specifically eviction prevention and rental assistance. But as far as any other housing issues that come up, security deposits, repairs, all that information can be now found in one place, and that's phillytenant.org. So we switched from, more of a flyer model to more of a central location for information model. And then as far as having somebody who can speak with you and kind of help people with the issues that they're facing and have that sort of human to human contact, we also have a Philly Tenant hotline, and you can find that number on phillytenant.org, and you can call somebody and be connected with a housing advocate and just explain the issue, and have somebody walk you through like next steps. And again, that's just really trying to bring that kind of, even through the phone, bring that personal touch back into the work that we do, because it's so important. So those are the two main ways that we've changed our systems. And even within the medical legal partnership, because we're no longer stationed at CareBots, like most of the referrals that I get from CareBots and from CHOP are now through email. And so again, it's about, reaching out individually to tenants, even though it's through phone right now, but just creating that connection, so that people know that there's somebody on their side as everything else, is going on in their lives. So those are the main ways of innovation, but there's definitely, those are on the ground things. We have sort of global changes that I know we'll get to in the next few questions, but those are the main ways.
Yeah, certainly. You touched on the importance of advocates, and really that's the role that your team plays. And Crystal, I want to turn it over to you, because I know Uplift, that's what you guys do too. You're advocates for your family. So really, how have you guys had to innovate during this time?
For one, we had to, as Michael Jackson challenged us to do in his song, we had to take a look at the man in the mirror. So that means that as an agency, as individuals operating within that agency, we were forced to acknowledge how civil unrest, how the gun violence and homicide, police brutality, the loss of jobs and income, and just an overnight change in our world, all while living through a pandemic, has impacted each of us, because we were not exempt. Just because we were supporting others did not mean that we got a pass. We were being impacted just like the families we were supporting. COVID-19 not only changed the way we live, but it also changed the way we grieve and the way we said goodbye to our loved ones. It changed how we celebrated, from birthday parties to proms and graduations and other family gatherings, you know. So in essence, the pandemic kind of changed our response, or the way we were able to respond. We at Uplift, we were used to running in-person grief groups. We were used to having that human touch with the families. Well, that all changed. So here we were, some more tech savvy than others. We were trying to duplicate what had already been done, and what already worked, mind you, but it wasn't working. Yes, the faces on my screen, they were all the same, you know, the same that sat across from me in the group, but something was so different. It wasn't until we recognized that after COVID-19 hit, we were not dealing with groups as usual. Before, families came to process a death, but now they were processing their thoughts, their feelings, and concerns about loss due to the pandemic, loss due to racial injustices, loss due to having to move because they could no longer afford their rent. And the list goes on. So we revisited our definition of grief so that we could now include all loss, because grief is a natural reaction to loss, not just death. Many of the participants were experiencing the very same physical reactions, the same thoughts and feelings that they had after their person died. And guess what? It felt as if the world was grieving. Needless to say, our curriculum had to change to reflect what we were witnessing, so families were able to process what was going on in their world, in their community, in their home, their family, and in their bodies. We immediately started Uplift at Home, which can be accessed on our website, which provides families and children with resources and activities, from reading books to playing games, and it's designed to bring calm during this time of uncertainty. We quickly noticed that young children cannot be expected to sit still for long periods, nor keep long periods of concentration. So we launched a new group called the Come Together group. And that's where children in kindergarten through the second grades, they can be in group with their caregivers. By having the caregiver and the children together, both can do activities, have dedicated time together, and meaningful discussions. Also, we're now providing the grief groups and caregiver workshops in Spanish to just kind of meet that language barrier that has been in our communities.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you mentioned that you really had to change your model. I think a lot of us had to, as we're all in this virtual environment. And Megha, you touched on it a little bit in your intro of how Food Connect had to change their model a little bit. So can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it was a really big shift. As an organization, we help service several hundred meal sites, food cupboards, pantries in the Philadelphia area. And overnight, these pantries started experiencing just extremely high volumes. And at the same time, there are, again, spikes and dips in the food supply. So it was a very new dynamic, and it was happening and unfolding very fast. And there were also closures happening at the same time. Hours were being adjusted. So there was a lot to manage, and interestingly enough, our services shifted to meet people even closer to where they were as a result of it. So we rolled out contactless deliveries. We, instead of delivering from food vendor to meal site, we would actually work with the meal sites and extend our services as they've identified homes that were food insecure. So with CHOP, there were a few different sites that you all had worked with, and we helped deliver, it was close to over 4,500 deliveries that we worked with CHOP on, and delivered meal boxes to families to their homes. And this was a 12-week program, and the total was close to 80,000 meals. These food boxes were sourced from local farms, which is incredibly important to support right now, because they're on the a lot of local businesses, a lot of local farms were also experiencing a lot of pressure. So supporting the local businesses while they're trying to figure out how to get their food out, and then being able to deliver that to families that are experiencing food insecurity, that have tested positive for food insecurity, what that means for their mental health, for their social health, for their physical health. Food kind of, as Crystal was kind of mentioning, if your tummy is grumbling and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or you don't know where you're going to provide for your family, it's hard to kind of focus on other solutions when that basic need is not being met. And while hunger has existed since the start of time, I mean, I think the pandemic kind of sheds a new light. A lot of institutions, leaders, organizations are being forced to reevaluate their programs. They have to look inward, as you mentioned, because business as usual is no longer an okay standard. And so for us, we've been doing a lot of work with the Healthier Together initiative to make sure that all of the solutions around food security, food access, the social determinants of health, how do you access the people that need the food immediately? How do we get access to those people? How do we give them food right away? Do we have a 24-hour turnaround time? Do we have a 48-hour turnaround time? How many weeks do we provide the support? So there's a lot of different elements when thinking about the innovation side of it. But for us, the real kind of shift that happened was being able to roll out, we've always had real-time notifications. Our partners can track their drivers, they can track the deliveries, they get notifications when the delivery arrives, and we work in the hunger relief space to understand the pantries that we work with and the shelters. But now the added layer of giving them additional support on the home distribution side really eased up some of the burden that they were experiencing on site if people were coming and they couldn't make all the meals because there's just too many people to feed. And due to COVID-19 restrictions, you can't have all the meals made with the same number of staff indoors. So there were a lot of different elements that people were battling there. So we're continuing to look at additional ways to collaborate. How do we identify the people that are in need the most? What does that referral process look like? We are currently testing even more streamlined ways to be able to get that referral process smoothed out. But it was very kind of an eye-opening moment when, CHOP was kind of when the pandemic happened. I remember, Amanda, you kind of reaching out and having such a thoughtful approach to food access, because a lot of times these things get overlooked. And the fact that as an organization, the Healthier Together initiative, in my opinion, has been, we've worked with a lot of programs, and how forward thinking you all are at the depth of your impact. It's really helped in framing the program and meeting people where they are and where their needs are, being able to roll out solutions accordingly. So very grateful for the work that we're doing together, because we're getting a lot of positive feedback on that. And even some of the alerts that we've had in our system, we've had to change that to have to also roll it out in Spanish, so that the language access can also be addressed. So there's just more layers to that we can continue to roll out. But just the pandemic really, I think, shed a light on some of the more immediate needs that need to be addressed, and again, meeting people where they are instead of the other way around.
Yeah, certainly. I appreciate your kind words with Healthier Together, and I know you mentioned before in terms of really reevaluating some of our programs, and I think that's what a lot of our organizations are doing right now, of how do we need to pivot to really address the needs. So I actually want to pivot a little bit to talk about data. So CHOP is a data-driven organization, and that's really what's driving Healthier Together in terms of really having the hard data of the needs, and then coming up with these evidence-based solutions to address those. So addressing these social needs definitely requires good data, both from our local community, so getting that community input and buy-in, but then also the statistics. So I think given the pandemic and the ever-changing climate of our community during this time, it's somewhat hard to get real data in real time that's constantly changing. So Meg, I actually want to turn it back to you, because I do know Food Connect is also very data-driven. So how do you stay aware and responsive to the needs that are changing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think for us, it's so important to make sure that the impact that we're making, we're tracking it, because the data, as you say, it helps kind of tell the story of how big the need actually is, and it captures that. So it's not just us saying it because we've heard it and we're seeing it and we're feeling it. It's because the numbers also show it, and it helps people who aren't used to the space, who are new to the space, or hearing about it for the first time. The numbers help connect them a little bit faster sometimes than a story would. So for us, the data is really important because we're able to kind of track the impact. With food security, kind of zooming out a little bit with food insecurity, I mean, there's at least there's at least about 14% of households prior to the pandemic that were experiencing food insecurity on a national level. Within Philadelphia, 1 in 4 people were food insecure. These are all pre-pandemic numbers. Post-pandemic, we're having over 30 million jobless claims. So unemployment is spiking. And with any time that a household experiences food insecurity, the outcomes for diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, mental health issues, all of these risk factors go up. So I think when we're thinking about food as kind of one aspect of their need, all of these health outcomes kind of can be traced back to whether they have access to healthy food. Over 80% of the food requests that Food Connect gets in are fresh produce or prepared meals, which is traditionally overlooked in the food rescue space and the traditional hunger relief model, which relies on canned goods and boxes and packaged goods. So a lot of what we do, because it's real-time communication, real-time collaboration and alerts, a lot of what we are able to do is capture produce that is fresh, that needs to get distributed that same day or the following day, and prepared meals that can get over to a meal site that's servicing it tonight. So there are new opportunities that open up when we have the tools to be responsive. So that's kind of some of the food insecurity on the side of monitoring some of the health outcomes. And we're working with food pharmacy, with CHOP, to make sure that with this increased food access, how are the outcomes from the increased food access? What are the outcomes that families are experiencing? What are the outcomes that children are experiencing as a result of that? Because again, a lot of times people may not have access to public transportation or their own transportation. So having this extra element provides a very critical shift that needs to take place in relief solutions. So we're excited to continue to see where the outcomes will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does anyone else want to chime in on the data and how you guys stay on top of the emerging needs?
I'll chime in. Yeah, I can echo everything Amanda and Megha said about the importance of keeping data just so that we know that we're being responsive to the need. And that's particularly tricky when we're trying to connect my specialty, housing, with health, because we do know that housing, especially now, is a form of healthcare with the pandemic and with the stay-home orders and just the need for social distancing. And this kind of goes to an earlier question you mentioned, Amanda, about innovating to address the needs that are coming up in the pandemic. A critical piece of that is really following the data and figuring out how people are experiencing the pandemic. And so one of the things that we've done at our organization is kind of open up new COVID-focused data projects so we can track how the needs are changing within Philadelphia households in relation to, people losing their jobs and not being able to make both their rent and mortgage payments. And actually, one of the ways in which we knew that we would have to pre-pandemic, like I was saying earlier, there are a lot of different housing issues in Philadelphia. Yes, there's eviction. 1 in 14 families get evicted each year in Philadelphia. We're fourth in the nation for the rate of evictions. So Philadelphia, based on the data, we knew we were already facing an eviction crisis. And then, compound that with COVID, with people losing their jobs, and with the home becoming that much more important now that we're facing a public health crisis. It was kind of what we saw was that there were two crises, that were going to compound on each other. Eviction increasing the rate and the spread of COVID, just because, once you no longer have a home to practice social distancing in, you're headed to crowded shelters, you're doubling up with different family members, and we're increasing the likelihood of contact. So we could see that the fact that we already had an eviction crisis in Philadelphia would make the spread of COVID worse. And we could also see that because of COVID and because of the higher rate in unemployment, people were going to be facing eviction at a higher rate than we saw pre-pandemic. And we also know that both eviction and both hospitalization from and death from COVID are disproportionately affecting Black people, poor people. And so what the data kind of showed us is that all of these potentially disastrous health outcomes were going to fall on one specific population. And that, I think that's one of the things that really fueled our new initiative with Healthier Together, with the eviction prevention in the Healthier Together zip codes, because we know that those zip codes in West Philly are facing high eviction rates already. And that, the reason that we're able to be responsive and to kind of open these new initiatives is because we're following the data on that. And so data has been a driving force in how we did our housing work prior to the pandemic, and now that the pandemic has hit and we know that that we're really needing to focus our advocacy on the most vulnerable populations. That's, all of that information that we're tracking is really helpful to make sure that our advocacy is responsive to the people who have the most need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touched on how all of these needs are just compounding on top of each other and really making it so complex. so complex that not only like one organization can solve the problem. And I think that just brings in the importance of collaboration and really the need for it. So we hear a lot about collaboration all the time, but we rarely hear about the challenges of collaboration. And I know you all know firsthand about those challenges that come along when really bringing diverse stakeholders together. So partners may have different priorities, different timelines, different decision-making processes. How do you make collaboration work? Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Sure. So these trying times have forced us at Uplift to recognize our limitations. So we have adopted a saying, small but mighty, to affirm that our impacts and our reach far outweighs our size. But we're small, but we are mighty, indeed. But we would be fooling ourselves if we thought we could do it all alone. We saw quickly that needs were innumerable, and there was no way that we would be able to do it. There was no way that we could reach all of the, those that were in need, those that needed the grief support at the time. It was no way that we could do it. And we're still meeting with community partners to collaborate, just to ensure that we're not only just duplicating services, we also want to establish warm handoffs when we're referring families from agency to agency. So identifying other supportive services in the community that we could potentially refer to and work with is very crucial. And we know that it's beneficial for our families that we serve. We saw that we can't come in and fly with a cape ready to save the day. Reason being, because when we approach a situation with a cape, we're saying that we already know the problem and that we are the solution. When in actuality, there is no one-size-fits-all support model. We need a lot of resources. The communities we need a lot of different needs. There are a lot of different needs here. And knowing what programs and supports already exist in the community, engaging with community members is very vital. As I already said, not only will we get a better understanding of the issues, but we'll also, maybe stumble upon the solutions.
Yeah, you touched on something really around collaboration with partners to streamline the access. So Megha, I want to turn it over to you. I know you use that model of really like learning about the needs and then kind of addressing them. And Crystal mentioned of like, there's no one size fits all. So can you speak a little bit about one, how you're really collaborating with those partners to streamline the delivery, but also those challenges that come and arise with that?
Yeah, collaboration is definitely something that we've had to push for in the space, because a lot of times there are solutions, there are multiple solutions, there are multiple needs, and everyone's trying to figure out what the best approach is, and everyone has their own approach. But in times of need, in times of crisis, and also being a mission-driven organization, we see it as a requirement to work together, even if it is at the cost of smaller wins that we could have if we did it by ourselves. Because at the end of the day, the data has shown us that as an organization, if we are building solutions that can enable real-time communication, real-time collaboration, we are actually able to move so much more food. We are able to increase food access more than double, triple the traditional amount, because we are able to communicate in real time and have smooth handoffs. So for us, it's really important for us to be able to look at food access through the lens of collaboration, because there are so many organizations doing incredible work. It's how do we support them? It's not, we don't have the approach of how do we come in and replace what they're doing or do it better than them. It's how do we support the people who are already doing an incredible job, because that is going to get us so much further. And it also builds trust. I think this is a really, it's a soft word, but it's important in the nonprofit space and in the food access, hunger relief space. People need to trust that your organization is going to do right by them. And a lot of times, if you have a for-profit model or there's different structures, just how the program is set up that may not align with the interests of the end recipient. So we're very, very conscious of that when we structure a program to make sure everybody involved has the same interest when we're rolling out a solution. On the collaboration side, we have been working on integrations and handoffs and streamlining some of these new requests that we're getting on the home delivery side and the distribution side. So we have rolled out additional links on our website where partners can sign up for home delivery. We've structured enough of these programs where we kind of see the patterns, see what's working, and see what needs to be adjusted. Some of the challenges that we've run across are we are still servicing a population that is impacted by the digital divide. So when thinking about technology, innovation, and solutions, we also have to understand that there's a good amount of people, if you're homeless or if you can't afford your next meal, chances are you may not have a smartphone. You may have a flip phone or a dial phone. So there's a lot of considerations when we have to think about how do we increase food access. Yes, the alerts are great, but if you don't have a smartphone, you're not going to get the alerts. So we're doing a lot of internal user testing to understand where are the access points that do have access to technology. How can we use them as a conduit to increase food access? So there's a lot of user testing going on, and a lot of times what sounds fancy and wonderful on paper really isn't great for the end user. So we're very conscious of that, and we take a human-computer interaction design approach when it comes to rolling out solutions on that side. So collaboration, keeping the end recipient in mind, and working on integrations and smooth handoffs. It's been a lot. It's been a lot, and it's been challenging because there are a lot of people that need food right now. So just trying to make sure that we're keeping up with the demand and being receptive and listening when we need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you spoke about really seeing what people are already doing and then really trying to multiply that impact. And I think that's so important in a city like Philadelphia, that the need is so high, and really the demand for all of the services that our organizations are providing really does surpass the availability from whether it's city partners, nonprofits, or the private sector. And especially in our current financial climate, they're also like squeezing funds in terms of these different sources. So I'll really pose this question to anyone. How has your organization really been challenged to multiply its impact during this challenging time? Don't all jump at once. So maybe I'll do it a little bit more pointed and targeted. So Osarugue, so how has CLS really been efficient and effective with limited resources in terms of the need in terms of housing stability is so great in the city? You mentioned Philly has the fourth highest eviction rate. So really, how has your organization been efficient with your resources and be able to really make an impact?
So I think one of the biggest ways in which we've been able to kind of shift out the way that we do the work so that we make a larger impact, especially like you said, Amanda, the need in Philadelphia it's overwhelming. And when we think about larger advocacy issues, what we're really trying to focus on is if this person doesn't go to CareBots, doesn't have an attorney, and they're still facing eviction, is what we do within our organization impactful enough that it'll reach them. And so what we've been focusing on, both in housing and in other areas, such as public benefits and utilities, is widespread policy changes, things like eviction moratoriums that'll affect people who can never get to an attorney or can never access our services. Eviction moratoriums, working with the court staff to really educate them on making sure that the process with just how things are going right now, especially because like we had, I imagine that you know this, Amanda, but I'll just say it just in case it's not widely known information. The way that we've really worked to protect renters in Philadelphia has been piecemeal. So there's a little bit going on in City Council with the Emergency Housing Protections Act. There's a little bit going on with the courts issuing eviction moratoriums by like 60-day intervals. Governor Wolf has been issuing eviction moratoriums. And then there's just separate advocacy going on with the prevention of lockouts, even when somebody has been through a hearing. And so that kind of advocating at the higher level, you know, at the state, with city council, with the court, to enact changes that'll affect a larger range of people, we've seen has been effective in addition to the direct work we do with our clients. And so that's what we've really been focusing on, is just kind of what can we do large scale that'll have an effect on somebody who may never, you know, come see me or come see my colleagues. And I think that's what we really have to think about with COVID because of the fact that not a lot of people aren't walking into people's offices anymore. So just larger policy initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that advocacy piece is so important. So I know we only have 3 minutes left. So I want to pose this last question to you all, that I know you're all rock stars in your everyday disrupting the determinants. So I want to end on a high note. So what really gives you all hope in knowing that collaborations like the ones that we spoke about here today are happening all throughout Health Year Together and taking place? So what really gives you hope? Megha, I'll start it off with you.
Yeah, what gives me hope is just, having incredible peers and colleagues like the ones on the panel with me today. And there are so many people. There are more people that care about solutions and that care about helping one another out. And I think a lot of times when we look at the news, that's not representative of reality all the time. Especially during an election year. So I think sometimes just turning that off and taking a breather and just understanding and looking kind of at the solution makers and the people that are wanting to do good by their neighbors and good by their family and friends, and just kind of remembering that there are so many people that are working towards the same solution. And at the end of the day, we all want a lot of the same things, and if we can look at what we have in common and push forward and fight for the solutions we believe in, I think that's going to make a really big impact.
Mm-hmm. Crystal, what gives you hope?
Amanda, it's something you said earlier. You said it takes a village, and I know that saying is often used when we're speaking about raising children, but it rings true when dealing with many of life's ups and downs. We all need supportive individuals in our lives, like everyone right here on the panel with me. It certainly takes a village.
Mm-hmm. Osarugue, what about you?
Yep, I completely agree. There's a lot of input right now, and the times when I feel most energized in this work is when I'm connected with collaborators that I know and that I respect and that I trust. And just hearing all of the wonderful work that your organizations are doing, and that we all kind of believe in what we're doing, and just the dedication that I see on this panel gives me some hope, because I think outside of spaces where we're really on the same page about social determinants, about anti-poverty and anti-racism work, outside of that space, there's a lot to despair about. So it's always nice to connect with people who understand the importance of uplifting the voices of the unheard.
Yeah, certainly. It's partnerships like these that we're highlighting of what's possible and what really the future holds. So I want to thank all of you for joining as panelists for such a fruitful discussion. I'm grateful that you joined me here today. And for viewers at home, if you want to learn more about Healthier Together and want to get involved in any of the work that we mentioned here today, I encourage you to go to www.chop.edu and search Healthier Together to learn more about the initiative and how you can get involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.